Hey, what's up? Welcome back. You're watching the third episode in this series where we're building out a short-term rental marketplace. In the last episode, we talked about authentication. In this episode, we're going to go through the basic sort of create, read, update, and delete for listings, which is one of the core sort of models for a short-term rental marketplace. In the last episode, we went over authentication, setting up Google with OmniAuth and Devise. That was pretty fun. In this episode, I wanted to go through, talking about how we might create a listing. So in our Notion doc here, where we're sort of planning things out, a listing needs to have a title, and then there's actually going to be, I think, several different descriptions, but maybe we'll just say like an about, and it's going to have photos, and it's also going to have, let's see. There's going to be pricing, but I think pricing is something else we want to tackle down the line. This is going to be related back to a specific host. So maybe we're going to have like reference to the host. I guess, let's see. There are going to be a number of other things, but let's start with these basics and see how far we can get with just sort of creating listings. In fact, I think we might want to save photos as like a completely separate concern for the listing, like actually adding photos to the listing, because that's, generally a photo upload UI is going to be unique. And in fact, we have sort of another model here for photos, and so we're going to have like the actual file for the photo, but we also want maybe a caption, and we might even keep track of like the room or details about the room. In fact, also for the listing, we might want to track like how many so one way to go about this is to track all of the rooms that are in the listing, and whether or not each room has like certain beds. So here we might have like a listing room, and we might have a listing bed. And a listing room can have like beds, like listing beds, right? And then the listing bed might have a size. This is like king, queen, whatever. I think at the high level for the listing, we might want to say how many folks you can host. So here you might say something like guests, like num guests, or like max guests, right? This is the maximum number of guests that you're willing to host. And then here you would have your rooms. So that's going to be an association to a listing room, which is going to have all this stuff. And then, the listing room would be related to a listing, and a listing bed would be related to a listing room. And what else might we want as part of the listing? Let's see. So perhaps, the location. So we're going to want to know the address. The host is going to enter an exact address, but the actual guest shouldn't see the exact address until after they book for privacy reasons. So, we'll keep address. What else might we want? I think after someone types in the address, it would be good to store the lat and long for the listing in the database next to the listing, so that maybe we'll have some sort of geo-IP thing that happens. So let's store the lat and long. Okay, let's start with this and see how far we can get. All right, so let's start here and start by generating the model for listings. All right, so we'll say Rails G model listing, and this is going to have a host, references, and that's going to be the user ID for the host. Turn into to-do list. Okay, so we've got host, title, that's going to be a string, we can keep that. About is going to be text. Photos, that's going to be an association. We've got max guests, that's an integer. We've got rooms, that's an association. Address, should we store the address directly on the listing model itself or in a separate model? Let's say address line 1, address line 2, city, state, postal code, country, and we need lat and long. And I think that's a good start for the listing model. Now, when we're actually creating the migration for the listing, when we see this, when we say that this references a host, we actually need to tell it that the table this is referring to is the users table, not the hosts table. And we do that by saying as user, I believe. Okay, so the title, we want this to be null, false. Maybe we can have a null, or we don't necessarily have to have an about. The max guests will default to 1. And then we want to make some other validations about the max guests, so we'll do that next. City, state, zip, country, etc. Maybe we just make the make all of those optional for now, and then we can come back and have some sort of like validation that says that we might want to have like 2 steps. Like one is you're drafting a listing and you're getting it ready to go live, and then you have it and it's actually published. So maybe in fact we also want t.string, and that's going to be like the listing state, and this is whether or not it's, well, status maybe, and this is whether or not it's like published or like draft, or, oh, this is good because we can actually, in fact, yeah, let's use an enum here. So integer status, and this is going to be an enum. So we'll start off with the status, and we'll have a default of 0 here, and maybe we'll have 0 means that it's draft, and 1 means that it's published, and 2 means it's rejected or something. So we can come up with different statuses here. So when you're storing lat and long, you actually want to use a different data type than a string. Here we're going to use decimal, and when we're specifying a decimal type, we can also give it precision and scale. And for a lat and long, we want the scale to be 6 and the precision to be 10, I believe. So we'll say precision 10, scale 6, and that should work well. Okay, so I think this is a good start for our migration for the listings table. So we'll say Rails DB migrate, see if we run into any issues. All right, so it is thinking that we're using the hosts table. So inside of create listings, by saying as user, I expected this to work for the users table. Okay, so I messed this up. So this is not foreign key true. This is foreign key to table is users. Let's see if that works. Rails DB migrate. What's nice about having that column named host instead of user is that it really solidifies like the type of association or the type of relationship between the user object and the listing that they're creating. All right, so it looks like that worked. So let's open up let's actually, I want to say, go to the gem file, go to development and test, gem, or just development, and say gem annotate. This is a tool I use in all my Rails applications, and then I can say bundle exec annotate -- models. That will add all of the columns as comments at the top of the models. So now I can jump into this listing model, and we can see exactly what we got going on at the top. All right, so let's go through and add some validations. You'll see that we have a belongs to host, but if we tried to open this up in the Rails console, then we're going to run into some issues because by default belongs to host is expecting a model called host. So if we say listing.create, and then, well, it actually, that failed. So L equals listing.new, and then L.host is nil. L.host is user.first. Uninitialized constant listing : host. So this is the kind of error that you get if you don't actually have that association set up. And so here what we need to do is actually say class name, class_name is user. And we put user in quotes just to avoid any order of operations in loading of the files, right? So if the listing file happens to be loaded first, you can use the string user here, constantize that, and pull out the actual class. So let's reload this. And if we say L equals listing.new, L.host is user.first, now we're actually setting it and it's not giving us any errors. So that association is now set up correctly. We also want to add some validations. So validates the title, presence true. Okay, while we're here, we can also set the enum values for status. Enum status points at draft or published. And we'll start with just those two statuses for now, but eventually we could make that more complex. So now if we say l.title is, actually we need to reload and say l equals listing.new. l.host is, okay, and you can also see the status here is already showing as draft. Even though the underlying column for status is an integer column, now we're using an enum, so this is showing as draft. If we look above, it used to say 0, status is 0. So now that's a little bit more clear. l.host is user.first. l.title is test1. l.valid, so we can check and see if it's valid now. It is, because it's passing all of our validations. And now we can say l.save. All right, so we're going to add one more validation here. We're going to validate that the guests is between maybe like 1 and 100. So we're going to say validates max guests, numericality greater than 0, less than 101. And that's a little confusing, but yeah, I can say less than or to 100. All right, so that's going to give us some numericality constraints. So now if we were to try to create a negative max guests, for instance, so if we say l is listing.new, l.max guests is equal to 101, l.valid, it's going to say false, l.errors.full messages. Here we see the max guests must be less than or equal to 100. So that's pretty cool. We can also try like, oh, l.max guests is equal to -1, and then run the validations again and check out the errors. Now we see max guests must be greater than 0. So that's pretty cool. All right, so at least we've got the model layer set up for storing listings. Let's create now a controller that will have all of the 7 actions for performing CRUD operations on listings. So Rails G controller, listings, the listings controller. And I'm debating whether or not we should sort of namespace these under hosts and guests, but for now I'm going to keep everything at the top level. And if we need to, we can reorganize it so that we have, 2 different sort of interfaces for the host and the guest. So for now, let's just say that this listing endpoint is going to be only visible. In fact, let's actually do some namespacing now, some basic namespacing now. So let's say this is going to be under the host namespace, the listings controller, and it's going to have new to allow you to view a form. We'll have the edit to edit a listing. We will have the index to list a list of listings, and we will have the show page, which shows you all the details for a given listing to the host as the host. And then I think we're going to want a separate guest listings, which is going to be sort of the discovery flow for those listings that have been published. All right, so we're going to create this controller here in the host's namespace. All right, so the next thing I want to do is let's go over to our routes and make sure that those are set up correctly. So we'll open up routes. And you'll notice that we have this namespace host. So that's totally expected and that's great. We're actually just going to say resources listings, and that will give us all 7 routes for our listing controller. And here in our new route, we're going to have at listing, listing.new. Edit is going to be at listing is current user.listings find params ID. All right, so this is going through an association on the user model. We haven't actually set up that association yet, so let's go to the user model and say the current user has many listings. We'll put this below devise. And in order to know how to get to the list of listings for a given user, we need to go into the listings table, but the listings table doesn't have a user ID foreign key that points back to the user. So in this case, we have to say foreign key is host ID, and that should come back, or that should allow it to like reference back at us. I don't know if that makes any sense. All right, so index is listings, and this is going to be current user.listings.all. Listing is current user.listings.find params ID. Again, this controller is just for the host that's logged in. Okay, we're going to have a create action here. Listing is current user.listings.new. Listing params. So we're going to create a new params method down here. Listing params. And what are we going to allow the user to pass in? Params.require listing.permit, and then we're going to allow them to pass in a whole bunch of stuff. So let's pull up that listing thing again so we can reference the columns at the top. And we don't want them to be able to pass in everything, but they should be able to pass in the title for sure. They should be able to pass in about, max guests, address, line 1, line 2, city, state, postal code, country, and that's it. Okay, we don't want them to be able to pass lat long or status. We're going to calculate the lat long and status based on the address that they put in. And if we can't figure it out that way, we might have to build some UI for hosts to be able to sort of drop a pin themselves. But for now, this should work out great for creating a listing. So if listing.save, redirect to @listing. Otherwise, we want to render new. And in flash.now, for errors, we'll put in there @listing.errors.full messages. And we can just sort of like iterate over all of the errors and show those. All right, so let's go to the views now. Well, actually, hold on, let's do update also. Def update and destroy. So we're getting pretty close. So we've got update @listing is current user.listings.find params ID. If @listing.update for the listing params, I think we want to keep these the same. Like, I don't think we're gonna, well, okay, so one thing we might want to do is lock in the address after they have created the listing and not let them change the address of the listing. They can create a new listing. So yeah, maybe this is listing create params. And then we'll have listing update params. And those are going to be similar. We're just not going to allow them to change the address. And this is actually another thing that's pretty common, is locking down the address after it's created. The reason is that a lot of times, like if there's a fraudulent host, they might create a listing that looks beautiful and it's in a great location, and then they'll accept payment from a guest, and then they'll change the address to like some really janky place that's not where they promised the guest would be staying. Okay, so here we're going to use, so for the create, we need to now use listing create params. And for the update, we're going to use listing update params. Okay. And if we update, we're going to redirect to @listing. And if we don't, we're going to flash.now errors and set that to listing.errors.full messages, and we'll re-render edit. Okay, the last one we need is destroy. And for this one, we're going to find the listing. And I think instead of actually destroying the listing, we need to keep it around. So let's update these statuses to include archived, published. Maybe we have, yeah, archived. And then if it's archived, it won't show, but we'll say @listing.status equals archived. Or let's do this, @listing.update status is archived, and then we will redirect to host listings path. Okay. So we want to go through and test all of this out, but the very first thing we need to do is go to our views, and inside of our host views, we now have several things we want to populate. So in the listings index, here we can say your listings, and we want to build some sort of table here, but for now we can just say render, no, let's go iterate over all of them at listings dot each do L, and we'll print out L.title, and we're going to link to that. So we're going to say link to L.title for host listing path of L. And let's check it out. Let's see if that works. We're going to localhost 3000. Your session expired. Please sign in to continue /users/sign in. All right, we're logged in. Successfully logged in. All right, now we should be able to go to /host/listings, I think. Okay, here's your listings. All right, so host listings /new. Okay, great. Let's build out a form for creating a listing. So we're going to head over to new, and we'll say list your property. Okay, so here we want to build out a form. And again, I'm going to use HTML. I like using HTML over the form builders because I feel like it gives me a lot more control, and I have the ability to move this into a front-end framework very easily if I want to in the future. And also I can actually see the raw HTML, which gives me a lot more confidence than using sort of the Ruby form helpers. And also when I do it this way, I can apply all the same things that I've learned from other frameworks and technologies. So I just like to keep my forms super raw HTML. So we're going to make our post request here to host/listings. That's where we're actually going to send the create request. Create listing. All right, so then things we want in the form. Let's pull up our listing again. And again, we're going to use the columns that are here at the top. And so we don't need anything for the host ID, but we do need the title. And so we're going to say title, and that's going to be text, and the name is going to be listing title. And we don't need an ID. Well, yeah, we don't need an ID for now. And that's going to be at listing.title is, well, okay. So we're already at a place where, yeah, let's do it that way. All right, so that should work. About, it's going to be text. Label. Yeah, let's do it the same way for all of these. Max guests. When we're adding number inputs, it's nice to add the minimum, maximum, and step if we know what those are directly into the HTML. All right, let's take a look at this and just see how things are going. Wrong number of arguments. So I was passing in L, but this needs to be at listing, and then down here, this needs to be at listing. Okay, so we've got a form here. The title is like cabin, about it's like fun cabin or something. How many people can stay there? All right, that's good. And then we'll just say create listing. And undefined method listing URL. So when we say redirect there, listings controller, we need to say redirect to host listing path for at listing. Same thing here. Okay. All right, so here we are on the show page. So this is great. We're making good progress. Listing show, and here we will say this is going to be the title at listing.title, and then inside of here we're going to want to print out all of the properties, but for now let's just do at listing.json or .to.json and put this inside of a pre, just so that we can see like all the data that it actually has. Okay, so this is to JSON. I thought there was a way to make this indented. JSON.prettyGenerate. Let's see. Nope. .2h. Sometimes that works. Nope. As JSON. There we go. Okay, so now we're seeing all the stuff for the listing. That's pretty cool. This is the title of the listing. You know what I was thinking also is we might want to have a listing type, which tells you this is an apartment or it's a house or it's a farm or it's a cabin or something like that. So let's make that a to-do, is like adding type, like cabin, farm, apartment, condo, hut, yurt, treehouse, trailer. Okay, there's probably several, but we can keep it like that. Okay, so here is yep. So we've got like that basic thing working. Now let's add an edit button to our show page so that we can actually edit these listings. So we'll say or let's do a link to edit, and this will go to the edit host listing path for @listing. Notice that we have to use this host underscore in front of the listing path thing because we namespaced that. We namespaced that controller. So now we have our routes are all nested under host, and I think that's nice because eventually we're going to want the like guest facing stuff also. All right, so on the edit page, it's going to be pretty similar to new. But because we're not going to have the address fields, I don't want to share a form between the two. So here we'll say edit, and then the name of the listing @listing.title. Okay, so this is going to be to a different route, and the route is now going to be the host listing path for @listing. And we also need a hidden input that has the value underscore, or the value is put and the name is underscore update or method. So the name is going to be underscore method, I believe, and that should make it a put request. Okay, and these are all things that will stay the same. So here's our edit. If we say cabin 2 and we change our mind to have 4 people stay, fun cabin, blah, 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 update listing. All right, so now it looks like it was updated and the max guests did not update. That's odd. So listing /3, 2. Okay, max guests is not going through. That's because it does not have a name. Name equals listing max guests. All right, so now that we're sort of spiking all of this stuff out, we will need to go add some tests. And I actually do want to add tests to this application. So let's check this out. Let's see if this actually works now. Now we have 5 max guests. That's great. Now we actually have to go create a new listing to see and confirm that this actually works. So 8. Great. Okay, max guests is now being set as expected. That's cool. All right, so we are able to create, edit, update. Now we probably want to check out our list. All right, so we've got 2 in our list or 3 in our list there. And let's just add let's add something else here. We'll add a button that will allow us to delete listings. So button to delete, and this will say host listing path for L. And the method is destroy, I believe. It might be delete, I'm not sure. And we'll just add a BR after it. Host listing path. I don't know why I'm double typing an I. Okay, so let's try to delete this FDSA thing. Okay, deleted. No route matches post. Okay, so this is maybe delete. Let's try this again. Delete. Okay. So I think that might have worked, but it's not, we can't tell because we don't actually see the status. So, okay, cool. So this is archived. These are both in draft. That looks good. Okay. So we've got our cabin. We can edit the cabin. I think maybe we might also want a button here on the cabin that allows us to toggle from draft to published or something. But we can save that for later. At least we've got sort of the CRUD operations working for creating our listing now. Let's actually try to create a new listing with some bad data. So we'll say maybe with -1 guests and no title. Create listing. Value must be, okay, so now we're getting HTML validation. That's good. If we say create listing, we come back here, but we don't actually see why that's failing. So let's go to our new page, new here, and let's add a, so what we want to do is we want to iterate over the errors that are in flash.now. So we want to say like if flash errors, then we want to spit some stuff out. So we want to iterate over flash errors. So flash errors dot each do error. And then we want to print that out, error. All right, so if we go back over here to listings/new, try to create a listing. Okay, here we go. Title can't be blank. That's great. So maybe we want to put this in some sort of red div or something, but we'll come back and add some styling later. And because this is going to be such a common thing that we want to do is add these errors to the top of most forms, I'm actually going to move this into a shared sort of partial. So in layouts, I'm going to create a new partial called errors. Or maybe let's make a new view directory called shared. So shared. And in here, we'll say errors.html.erb. And so I'll move all of this into this errors.html.erb. And then up here, I can say render partial shared/errors. And because Flash is accessible globally, that should just continue to work. So if we go to cabin, edit, and, or actually, let's just do another new one, because we haven't added it to the edit page. So we're missing a quote here. All right, so that messed up. All right, let's try this again. Create listing, title can't be blank. Okay, so that's still working. And now we can also put this on the edit page without too much work. Okay, so now if we go back to our listings and we say, if we come in here and we say edit and we remove the title and try to update the listing, title can't be blank. Cool, and that should not have saved. Great, it did not save and we didn't lose our cabin there. All right, so at least we've got some CRUD operations up and running, but we definitely need to add some tests around the whole process for onboarding. Also, we didn't add inputs for the address or the geocoding or any of that. So in a future episode, we've got a whole bunch more work to do for tracking the lat long and for handling like publishing the listing. We haven't even talked at all about viewing the listings from the front end. So yeah, so this was just really kind of like the create, read, update, delete stuff for listings. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.